Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of SRI International and the National Science Foundation Center for Innovative Research in Cyber Learning, I'd like to welcome you to today's forum with Dr. Bror Saxberg from Kaplan Incorporated. This forum is part of CIRCL's Partnering for Impact program, where we're trying to expand the dialogue between, well, among researchers, educators, and product developers. Today's format includes a discussion on Twitter during and after the session with the hashtag that you should see on the screen, L-E-A-R-N-E-N-G-R, hard to pronounce. Please tune in and participate in that discussion. Also, of course, if you're on the WebEx and you have questions, you can type questions into the WebEx chat and someone in the room here will bring them forward. Our time frame today is short, so my introduction of Dr. Saxberg will be very brief. Basically, Dr. Saxberg has a BA in math and a BS in electrical engineering from the University of Washington. He got an MA in math while he was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He has a PhD in electrical engineering and computer science from MIT, and an MD from the Harvard Medical School. So my mother would say he's a real doctor. He started his career at McKinsey & Company and held, since then, executive positions at DK Multimedia in London, at Knowledge Universe, and at K-12 Inc. Nowadays, as Chief Learning Officer at Kaplan, he's responsible for a wide range of activities, including R&D on innovative learning strategies, new technologies, and new products. And he'll speak today about learning engineering, a topic that he has written passionately about and that we are all very interested in here at CIRCL. Dr. Saxberg.
Thank you very much.
Let me see if I can get your slides up.
Well, thank you very much for coming along today. Much appreciated. Yes, I'm going to talk about this idea of learning engineering. And it is interesting because there are no learning engineers. I mean, it's a made-up term, basically. And if you think about it, it's a bit of a mistake. We know why we need chemical engineers. If anyone in the Valley wants to make a new pharmaceutical company and start brewing up a vat of interesting chemicals, the last people you want involved with that effort are chemists, because they don't care about economics. They're not concerned about regulatory stuff or safety stuff. They do not love the box. They want to be out of the box. But chemical engineers, their love is working at scale. They want to get stuff at scale. And yes, that means working within all kinds of constraints, but that's what they're trained to do. And the other key piece is you do expect your chemical engineers to work with modern chemistry. If the guy you're hiring to work on your new pharmaceutical factory is really excited about phlogiston theory, the latest 17th century innovation, you will back away screaming. It is not a good environment. So, where are our learning engineers? People who work at scale. We have many great people who work at scale in education and training and instructional designers and so forth, but not so many who've been systematically trained to connect to modern learning science and keep using that as a touchstone for doing the work. Sometimes among educators, people say, oh, learning science, cognitive science has nothing to do with us because it's not practical. And you can find research that tells you anything you want. So therefore, I'm just going to do what I've always done and what my teachers have taught me and all this. And honestly, it's a misunderstanding that engineers are always in that condition. There is never enough science to tell you what to build. It's always under constraint. So you use the science to keep you out of trouble, maybe to give you some opportunities, and then you got to fill in all the rest of the tapestry around the tent spokes of the science. But yeah, you got to take some shots. There's no question. It's unclear. And of course, then you've got to measure at the end to see how do we do, how are we doing, and find what do you have to fix, because you almost always have to fix something when you do that. But this is normal engineering design work in most other areas. It's normal to do that. It's not so normal in the world of learning. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick scan of the kind of science that we use inside Kaplan, and then some of the kinds of results that we're getting by doing some systematic evidence-based work that have taught us not to trust our intuitions. So I'll share a little dirty laundry of stuff that we've messed up, and kind of talk a bit about where this can go. So Kaplan is large. It has 1 million students a year. Many of us in the US know it from test prep, but honestly, it's gotten much broader than that over the last 20 years. We have students in Australia, Singapore, the US, the UK. We have students who are in their late 20s, early 30s, who have not had a good experience with the educational environment, need to get into a new career, trying to get certificates and early qualifications in healthcare, all the way up to being the major trainer of US medical students for the United States medical licensing exam, some of the most trained and motivated students on the planet, and everything in between. We deliver associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctoral program in nursing, a virtual law school, corporate training, English language learning. So it's an amazing array of different kinds of learning. And when I came on board 6.5 years ago, we had reproduced the chaos of the entire education industry inside Kaplan, right? That nobody could talk to anybody else. The English language people couldn't talk to the test prep people. Nobody could talk to the corporate trainers, the higher ed people. They live in their ivory tower. And, it hadn't mattered. Just grow. But it was Andy Rosen, the CEO, who came in 6.5 years ago, who said, wait a minute. The gizmo is not different. It's a brain. It's a mind. We have 1 million of them. You're not scooping out the high school brain and putting in a college brain, or scooping out the college brain and putting in a work brain. It's the same brain. So why do we need so many user manuals? So I wasn't at Kaplan when they designed the job of Chief Learning Officer to be a person who would come in, get a common language infrastructure of ideas and processes across all learning environments. And then the critical decision that allowed me to come on board was, instead of picking one of the many mythologies that we had brought in as the single one for all of Kaplan, the decision was to ground it in cognitive science and learning science, so evidence-based work. And you know how it goes, all the good people were taken, Kaplan ended up with me. So this is what I've been doing for the last 6 years. This is how timing, it's all about timing people, that's how it works. So many of you in this room, how many of you are cognitive science background, know cognitive science? A fair number of these, so I'll do this actually fairly quickly. This is a model that's been, of how minds work and how expertise work, that's been validated repeatedly in lots of different settings, and yet it's essentially absent from most work that's done at scale in education. Audio and visual channels come into the mind, they get processed by working memory. And working memory's characteristics are it's really slow, very narrow, very error prone, but it is very flexible. It is the part that can take on the hardest new things and try to make slow and halting progress, but actual progress, right? It is the only way we can handle the most complex new things, get it into working memory, and working memory digs around in it. Now, we would be pretty uninteresting animals if all we had was working memory because it is so narrow. The critical thing that makes this be very interesting is working memory is supported by long-term memory, which has completely different characteristics. It is vast. It can run many things in parallel. It is fast. If it's trained correctly, it's actually very accurate if it's under the conditions in which it was trained and supposed to be trained. And most frustratingly for learning engineering and instructional design, it's essentially non-verbal. Working memory is the part of our minds that has the internal monologue. So if I start talking in a high squeaky voice, you're thinking he's very strange. You're right. But that monologue in your head is happening in working memory. Long-term memory typically does not have language attached in its processes, which means it often ends up invisible. To experts themselves, it's obvious what to do next. But the words have actually disappeared. The words have actually disappeared. And if anybody wishes these slides afterwards, I'm happy to make them available, so it's all good. So the key thing is, how do you get some stuff into long-term memory? That's a critical piece of this. And let me try one more fun exercise. How many people here drive a car? Raise your hand. Yes, of course, it's the Silicon Valley, right? I tried this in Singapore, it was a disaster. Okay, so raise your hand if you've had the following experience. You set out driving to place A, and then you're thinking about SRI and life and the freeway and all this, and you look up and you're at place B instead. Raise your hand. Raise your hand, raise your hand. Okay, so you're not crazy, at least not for that reason, okay? But, okay, lots of people, okay. So, I'm so old, I say I put in the wrong program card, okay, it's fine. And, you just go someplace else. But we don't think enough. Who drove you to the wrong place? Who was in charge of a ton of metal moving at 10, 20, 50 miles an hour for an extended period of time? Because it wasn't you. I mean, you were thinking about life in the universe. So who made those calls? And it's not like digestion. I frankly don't think a lot about what's happening to my breakfast muffin, right? I don't want to know. It's all good. But that's the product of millions of years of evolution of a parallel nervous system that handles that, okay? Driving, even in America, is not like that, right? It's not a parallel nervous system. It's a learned behavior that has been so deeply mastered that many complex decisions about driving just happen away from working memory. And researchers on expertise, as many of you know in the audience, they have found this is a characteristic of experts all over the place. They have many different complex cognitive routines and patterns and decisions that have become automated, obvious, quick. And so, how do you get things to be like that is actually an important issue. So, with that as kind of the model of, what is a mind like and what are those different characteristics, it actually opens up the opportunity to do this kind of learning engineering work, to think more systematically about, well, what are the conscious and non-conscious aspects of expertise? Because it's really important to unpack what's in long-term memory. And experts on their own don't even know anymore what's in long-term memory. So this is why so many learning environments that are designed actually miss that. A second thing then is evidence-based environments for mastery. Used environments for outcomes that have more evidence that they'll lead to mastery than kind of a random approach to this. And I'll talk a bit more about that. I won't talk so much about measuring and evaluating, but it is one of the things that teachers and faculty and folks working at scale are typically very bad at, which is building valid and reliable measures of expertise or learning. We end up building a lot of measures that are correlated with expertise, but not necessarily precise measures of expertise. And the problem is, especially if you're going to make an adaptive learning environment, if your measure is only correlated to expertise, somebody who's a great reader might pass a test on Boyle's law, and so you skip the instruction on Boyle's law. But if the items could be done by somebody who is merely a good reader, you've nuked the student. Because they don't know Boyle's law, they're just a good reader. You thought that was enough, it's not. You need to have a valid and reliable test of mastery of Boyle's law. So what does that task look like? And so that's actually quite hard to do. Mostly we've been protected because of the correlations, they're all fine. But as soon as you start doing efficient, advanced, adaptive kinds of learning, you've got to have valid and reliable measures of the actual outcomes you are after in order to avoid the tears that are likely to come. And then the middle one, and I'll talk a little bit about that, is use the technology to start doing rapid assessments, rapid tests, rapid checks and iterations. This is real engineering work to see how we doing. Are we getting there? Are we making it better, et cetera? So I'm not going to talk more about the understand expertise part. We could do that another time if you wanted to. There's fascinating research going back 30 years on how to do systematic interviewing to get at this. But I'm actually going to sort of bear down a little bit on evidence-based instructional design, because this is stuff and research that's really ready to be used today. Cognitive task analysis is still pretty speculative. We're working hard on it, but it's very challenging to do given how expensive it is. But I'm going to walk you through some of the real evidence-based instructional design that all our designers are being trained in now and how to do it. So a little more in this 10-minute cognitive science master's degree. There's basically several stages of mastery that the research seems to show how this works. So the first stage, and many of you have had this experience, you start trying to do something new, like taxes in a different country. I don't know if any of you ever tried to do that by yourself, but you just feel like an idiot because you're looking at the definition of this thing, and you know you just saw something relevant on the previous page, but it is not in your head anymore. And so you feel like a fool, right? Because I just saw it. I mean, it was just, so you flip back and say, oh yeah, that's what it was, right? And it is precisely because you have nothing relevant in long-term memory. So working memory is the only place you got, and it just gets repeatedly flooded. So how do you support learners through this slow and depressing stage of learning when you're a total novice? And what you can try to do is replace limited working memory with the visual system. So you lay out clear job aids, you lay out information so that you don't have to turn the page. It's right there where you need it, so folks can more quickly access what they're missing in their working memory and get over this first stumbling stage as efficiently as possible. Interestingly, during this stage, there's a good chance feedback won't be helpful because there's no space in working memory to work on it. Right? So you almost have to get through this stage first before you start yammering away about the subtleties of how you did it and all that, because it's just not, you can't even hear the person because you're feeling so frustrated and just, I can't even remember what happened on the previous page, much less listen to whatever you're talking about. So the next stage is, you could call it procedural, not meaning that it's not thinking, but rather it's, I can get to do this. I'm starting to be familiar with what I have to do. I don't have to turn the page back. I know what the thing is I need. And it starts to become familiar to you. And in this case, the way you keep building that and accelerating it is by giving varied practice tasks. So whatever the outcome is, stretch the person to get that outcome in different contexts and environments, because then your mind, as you're trying these different things, begin to lay down some tracks in long-term memory about the common parts of this, and you just get familiar with how, oh yeah, I see that commonality thing, I know what to do next, okay, let's keep going. Some aspects, by no means all, can go further than that, because some things just get stuck here. Some things can actually become automated. This is where they get fully embedded into long-term memory, and the way you get there is repeated, frequent practice. Oh, and I should have said, it's during that procedural stage, too, where feedback and coaching starts to be really helpful. Because now you have enough working memory to say, okay, wait, so I didn't do that. What do I need to do? Okay, let me try this again, but this time I got this in mind. That starts to happen in the procedural stage. The automated stage, you just need to up the frequency and more of this kind of stuff to actually build speed and accuracy. But I want to reiterate, not everything can be automated. Writing a convincing essay is not going to be something you can do while plotting your summer vacation at the same time. It's just not. It's always a long-term memory plus working memory challenge. It's hard. And yet you need some things to be automated in long-term memory to become a good writer. You know, generating a coherent sentence, even generating a coherent paragraph, you may not have to think a lot about as a very experienced writer, but the flow of the argument, the audience, how long this is, there's a whole lot of complex problem solving around writing an essay that's likely to still occupy working memory when you do that. Other things, like the driving thing, can become purely automated, and that's fine. Even diagnosing complex medical conditions can become fairly automated, even though it looks like magic on the outside. So, you know, but this is how you get to that. So, you know, related then to this, and this notion of, wow, depending on where a student is, because you'll have 16 students in an algebra class, and one of them, as soon as you write, you know, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 on the board, one of them is thinking, oh, quadratic equations, I hate them. She's probably going to make me factor it. I hate factoring polynomials, okay? And the other person sitting there, named Bror, is going to say, why are there letters and numbers on the same line? Okay? They are having exactly the same they're having exactly the same sensory experience. This is what's so interesting. The same input, audio and visual, but their actual cognitive experience of the events is completely different because of what's in long-term memory. Long-term memory said, it's a quadratic equation, you're going to factor it, and you hate these things. It's like, right? I don't have to think about this, right? I'm not struggling, I hate it, right? Whereas the other person's like, I don't even know what this is. So that class is completely different for those two kinds of minds. So where people are in this kind of stage is actually a critical learning engineering question when you're thinking about support for those folks.